The sun dipped low over the tranquil Japanese village, casting long shadows that stretched across the narrow, cobbled streets. The village, nestled among ancient cherry blossom trees, had been a haven of peace for centuries. Here tradition was not just remembered, it was lived. In a secluded dojo at the edge of the village, an elderly master of the ninja arts moved with the grace of a shadow. His name was Hiroshi, a man who wore his age like armor, each wrinkle a testament to years of wisdom and quiet strength. Hiroshi's movements were deliberate, every step, every breath in perfect harmony with the world around him. His students, a small group of young villagers, watched intently, mimicking his motions. Though their skills varied, their respect for their master was unwavering. Among them was Takeshi, the oldest and most skeptical. He had once dismissed the old ways, questioning their place in a modern world. Yet, under Hiroshi's tutelage, he found a newfound respect for the discipline and clarity the training brought. The tranquility was shattered by a sudden, blinding light in the sky. Takeshi shielded his eyes, peering up at the source. A colossal alien craft descended, its metallic hull gleaming ominously. Panic swept through the village like wildfire. Children cried, mothers gathered them up, and men shouted commands in an effort to protect their homes. Hiroshi stood firm, his eyes narrowing as he watched the craft land in a nearby field. The aliens emerged, tall figures clad in sleek, metallic suits, their faces hidden behind dark visors. They moved with a calculated precision, setting up equipment and erecting a perimeter around their craft. The villagers' fear grew as the aliens' technology buzzed and whirred, an otherworldly sound that set their teeth on edge. Takeshi felt his heart hammering in his chest, uncertainty gripping him. What could they do against such advanced beings? Hiroshi stepped forward, his posture calm and assured. "We will not fight them with strength," he said, his voice steady. "We will use the skills passed down to us, the ones they cannot understand." The aliens laughed at the villagers' fearful expressions, their voices distorted through their helmets. One of them, taller than the rest, scanned the crowd with a device that emitted a low hum. "Primitive," he scoffed. "Their defenses are laughable." Takeshi felt a surge of anger at the alien's words, but Hiroshi placed a firm hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Anger is a tool, Takeshi," Hiroshi whispered, "but only if you control it. Now watch and learn." The aliens began setting up a series of strange devices around the perimeter, each one glowing with an eerie blue light. Hiroshi watched them intently, his eyes narrowing as he studied their movements. He motioned for his students to gather around, his voice barely a whisper. "They rely on their technology," Hiroshi observed. "They trust it to see everything, to know everything. But they forget there are things beyond their understanding, things hidden in the shadows." That night, under the cover of darkness, Hiroshi led his students through the narrow alleyways of the village. They moved with the stealth of a whisper, their feet barely touching the ground. Takeshi's heart pounded, but he kept his breathing steady, remembering Hiroshi's teachings. As they approached the alien perimeter, Hiroshi signaled for them to stop. The devices hummed and buzzed, scanning the area with beams of light. Hiroshi crouched low, his movements fluid as he slipped past the beams, his form blending seamlessly with the darkness. Takeshi watched in awe, realizing just how much he had yet to learn. One by one, the students followed Hiroshi's lead, their nerves taut but their resolve firm. They moved in silence, a unit bound by purpose and trust in their master. Takeshi was the last to move. He hesitated, fear gripping him for a moment, but then he saw Hiroshi watching him, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. With a deep breath, Takeshi stepped forward, mimicking Hiroshi's movements. He felt the thrill of the challenge, the rush of adrenaline as he moved past the beams undetected. For the first time, he understood the true depth of his training, the connection between body, mind, and spirit that Hiroshi had taught them. They reached the edge of the alien encampment, and Hiroshi gestured for them to hide among the shadows. Takeshi crouched low, his breath steady, his senses sharp. He watched as Hiroshi began to move again, this time toward one of the glowing devices. With a swift motion, Hiroshi reached into his robe and pulled out a small pouch of powder. He tossed it into the air, and the device sputtered and blinked, its lights flickering before going dark. The alien guards snapped to attention, their weapons raised, but they could see nothing in the darkness. Takashi held his breath, every muscle in his body tense. Hiroshi signaled for them to retreat, and they moved back the way they came, as silently as they had arrived. As they regrouped in the dojo, Takashi's mind buzzed with what he had just witnessed. The aliens' technology, so advanced and imposing, had been rendered useless by a simple trick of shadow and silence. He looked at Hiroshi with a newfound respect, his skepticism replaced by a deep admiration for the old ways. "Sensei," Takashi said quietly, "I understand now. The power of what you've taught us, it's more than just tradition. It's survival." Hiroshi nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "The old ways are not just relics of the past," he replied. "They are tools for the present, and they will be our salvation." As the first light of dawn broke over the village, Takashi knew their real battle was only beginning. The aliens would soon realize their mistake, but by then, it would be too late. They had underestimated the power of the human spirit, a spirit forged in tradition and sharpened by adversity. And they would learn that some battles are won not with might, but with the quiet strength of shadows. The cool night air clung to the village, wrapping it in a shroud of stillness. Takashi crouched behind a thick bush, his eyes fixed on the alien patrols. The lessons from last night still echoed in his mind, sharpening his senses and calming his nerves. Around him, the shadows shifted with subtle movement, Hiroshi's students, poised and ready. They had all seen what their master could do, and tonight, they were determined to prove themselves worthy of his teachings. "Remember," Hiroshi's voice whispered through the darkness, barely more than a breath. "Patience is your greatest ally. Watch them. Learn their patterns." The aliens, oblivious to the hidden eyes watching them, continued their patrol around the perimeter. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, as if they were driven by an unseen clock. Takashi noted the rhythm, the way each step fell in sync with the last. He could almost hear the tick-tock of an invisible timer counting down. Beside him, his fellow students mimicked his focus, their breaths shallow and steady, their bodies tense but controlled. A sudden clatter broke the silence. A student, younger and less experienced, had accidentally kicked a loose stone. It skittered across the ground, the noise sharp against the quiet night. Takashi's heart leapt into his throat as the alien patrol turned, their visors flashing ominously in the moonlight. The tension snapped taut as a bowstring, ready to break. Hiroshi reacted with the swiftness of a striking serpent. He moved toward the student, placing a calming hand on his shoulder and guiding him back into the shadows. Takashi could see the student's panic in his wide eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly. Hiroshi's presence was a balm, a quiet reminder that fear could be mastered, not eliminated. "Fear is natural," Hiroshi whispered to them all. "It sharpens the mind, focuses the spirit. But you must not let it control you. Breathe. Remember your training." The aliens resumed their patrol, their attention diverted once more. Takashi let out a slow breath, grateful for Hiroshi's steadying influence. He watched as the master ninja signaled to continue their mission. They were to disable a central communication device, a large metal tower that loomed over the village like an unwelcome sentinel. Takashi's pulse quickened as they crept closer to the device. He could feel the night pressing in around them, the air thick with tension. Every step felt heavier, every breath louder. Yet he kept moving, his focus laser-sharp on the objective. Hiroshi led them with unerring precision, his movements a masterclass in stealth and strategy. As they reached the base of the tower, Takashi could see the intricate network of cables and wires snaking around its foundation. The device hummed softly, its glow casting eerie shadows on the ground. Hiroshi gestured to one of the older students, who nodded and stepped forward, pulling out a small blade. With careful precision, he began to sever the wires, his movements deliberate and controlled. The hum of the device faltered, a flicker of lights as if it were gasping for breath. Takashi's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the distant sound of alien footsteps, their boots crunching on gravel, growing closer with each passing second. "Steady," Hiroshi whispered, his voice a calm anchor in the growing storm. "We are not done yet." Takeshi watched as the older student finished cutting the last wire. The tower gave a final, shuddering whine before its lights blinked out, plunging the area into deeper darkness. The air felt electric, charged with the thrill of success. But there was no time to celebrate. The aliens had noticed the change and were moving in, their steps more hurried, their voices sharp with urgency. "Fall back," Hiroshi ordered, his tone commanding yet quiet. Takeshi followed the master's lead, retreating into the shadows with the others. The path back to safety was a winding one, designed to confuse and mislead. Takeshi could hear the aliens behind them, their frustration evident in their barked commands and frantic movements. The group slipped through the narrow alleyways, each turn calculated to keep them hidden. Takeshi could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his senses heightened to every sound and movement. He glanced back, catching a glimpse of the aliens stumbling in the darkness, their technology useless without its guiding signal. They reached the edge of the village and regrouped in a small grove of trees. Takeshi's breathing was ragged, his body tense with the thrill of the escape. Hiroshi watched them all, his eyes calm and assessing. "We did well tonight," Hiroshi said, his voice low but firm. "But this is only the beginning. They will adapt. So must we." Takeshi nodded, understanding the weight of his master's words. The aliens were formidable foes, but they were not invincible. Each night, they would grow stronger, more confident in their skills and their ability to fight back. Takeshi felt a new resolve building within him, a determination to honor the legacy of his village and his master. He looked at his fellow students, seeing the same determination mirrored in their eyes. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something much deeper, the preservation of their way of life, their culture, their very identity. The night stretched on, the stars above glittering like distant beacons of hope. Takeshi knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger, but he was no longer afraid. He was ready, and so were his comrades. As long as they stood together, they could face whatever came their way. The aliens would soon learn that their technology was no match for the spirit of those who refused to bow to fear. Takeshi took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs, and prepared himself for the battles yet to come. The war was far from over, but with each passing night, they were one step closer to reclaiming their village, their home. And as dawn began to break on the horizon, Takeshi felt a surge of pride. The old ways were alive, vibrant, and more powerful than ever. And they would prove it, one silent step at a time. The night hung heavy over the village, the air thick with anticipation. Hiroshi and his students crouched low in a dense thicket near the village's edge, their eyes fixed on the flickering lights of the alien encampment. Takeshi felt the cool earth beneath his palms, the scent of damp leaves filling his nostrils. He steadied his breathing, focusing on the task ahead. Tonight was different. Tonight they had a plan. An unexpected ally had emerged from the shadows, a quiet, unassuming villager named Kenta. He had lived on the outskirts of the village for years, his presence largely unnoticed. But when the alien threat descended, he stepped forward, revealing a past that took them all by surprise. "I was once a student like you," Kenta had told them in the safety of the dojo earlier that evening. His voice was steady but tinged with a hint of regret. "Many years ago, before I chose a quieter life. But the skills I learned then have not faded. I can help." Hiroshi had regarded him with a thoughtful expression, his eyes searching Kenta's face for signs of deception or fear. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "Then you will join us tonight. We need every advantage we can muster." Now, as they waited in the darkness, Takeshi glanced at Kenta, noting the calm confidence in his posture. Kenta's revelation had been a shock to them all, but there was no denying his expertise. He moved with a grace that spoke of years of training, his steps silent, his presence nearly imperceptible. The plan was simple but risky: infiltrate the alien command center and disable their main power source. Without it, the aliens would be thrown into disarray, their technology rendered useless. It was a dangerous gamble, but one that could tip the balance in their favor. Hiroshi signaled for them to move, and they slipped from the cover of the trees, shadows against the moonlit landscape. Takeshi's heart raced as they approached the alien perimeter. He could hear the faint hum of machinery, the occasional hiss of alien voices. Each sound heightened his senses, sharpening his focus. They reached a gap in the fence where the aliens had left a small opening, perhaps believing it too narrow for anyone to pass through. Hiroshi went first, sliding through with ease, followed by the others. Takeshi held his breath as he squeezed through, careful not to make a sound. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate. Once inside, they crept along the shadows, moving closer to their target. The command center loomed ahead, a tall structure bristling with antennas and blinking lights. Takeshi could see the main power conduit snaking up one side, a thick cable glowing faintly with a bluish light. Kenta motioned for them to stop, his eyes scanning the area. He pointed to a guard station near the entrance, his alien armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Hiroshi nodded and gestured for Takeshi to follow Kenta. This was Takeshi's moment to prove himself, to show that he had learned the lessons of his training well. Together they moved forward, keeping low to the ground. Takeshi could feel his pulse quicken, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He watched as Kenta reached into his tunic and pulled out a small dart, dipping it in a vial of dark liquid. Takeshi mirrored the action, his hands steady despite the tension. With a swift, practiced motion, Kenta hurled the dart toward the guard, the needle finding its mark in the alien's neck. The guard stiffened, then crumpled silently to the ground. Takeshi followed suit, his dart striking the second guard before he could react. He felt a surge of pride as the alien fell, their path now clear. They reached the base of the command center, and Hiroshi signaled for them to split up. Takeshi followed Kenta around the side, while Hiroshi and the others approached from the opposite direction. Takeshi's breath was shallow, his muscles taut with anticipation. He could see the power conduit now, just a few feet away. Kenta knelt beside it, his fingers deftly unscrewing a panel to reveal the wires within. "We need to cut the main line," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This will disrupt their entire system." Takeshi nodded, reaching for the small blade at his side. He felt the cool metal against his skin, the weight of it reassuring. He watched as Kenta carefully pulled out a handful of wires, sorting through them with practiced ease. A sudden sound, a clatter of metal, broke the stillness. Takeshi's heart leapt into his throat as he turned, seeing a group of aliens approaching, their weapons raised. The element of surprise was gone. "Go!" Kenta hissed, his eyes fierce. "I'll finish here. Cover me!" Takeshi didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, throwing a small smoke bomb to the ground. A thick cloud erupted, obscuring their view. The aliens hesitated, their movements uncertain. Takeshi took advantage of the confusion, darting forward to engage them, his blade flashing in the dim light. Hiroshi appeared beside him, his movements fluid and precise. Together they fought, their training and instincts guiding their actions. Takeshi could hear the clashing of metal, the hiss of alien weapons firing into the smoke. He focused on the fight, his senses honed to a razor's edge. From the corner of his eye, he saw Kenta working furiously at the conduit, his hands moving quickly despite the chaos around him. Takeshi knew they didn't have much time. He fought harder, pushing back the aliens with every strike, every dodge. Then, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the command center, and the ground trembled beneath them. The power conduit exploded in a shower of sparks, sending the aliens reeling. Takeshi felt a wave of heat wash over him, but he kept moving, his focus unwavering. "Retreat!" Hiroshi shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We've done what we came for!" Takeshi turned, sprinting back toward the gap in the fence. He could see Kenta following close behind, a look of triumph on his face. They reached the trees, slipping back into the cover of darkness, their mission accomplished. As they regrouped in the safety of the grove, Takeshi felt a sense of exhilaration, a rush of victory. Kenta smiled, his face flushed with adrenaline. "You did well, Takeshi," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. We all did. Hiroshi nodded in agreement, his expression calm but pleased. Tonight we showed them that we are not to be underestimated. But this is far from over. They will strike back, and we must be ready. Takashi understood the gravity of his master's words, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had taken a bold step tonight, one that would send a clear message to their enemies. The aliens had thought them weak, but they were about to learn just how strong the human spirit could be. As the night gave way to the first light of dawn, Takashi knew that their fight was far from over. But he also knew that they were ready for whatever came next. The battle for their village had only just begun. The first light of dawn filtered through the canopy, casting a golden hue over the forest floor. Takashi sat quietly under a large oak tree, sharpening his blade. His hands moved rhythmically, each stroke deliberate, the sound of metal on stone a steady whisper in the morning calm. The others were scattered around the grove, gathering themselves after the night's raid. They had struck a significant blow against the alien invaders, but Takashi knew that the real test lay ahead. Hiroshi approached, his steps soft and measured, his face shadowed with contemplation. We must be prepared, he said, breaking the silence. The aliens will not take this loss lightly. They will retaliate, and when they do, they will come with all their force. Takashi nodded, his eyes still on his blade. I understand, Sensei. We won't let them break us. We've shown them we're not as weak as they thought. Hiroshi's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Strength is not enough, Takashi. We must be smarter, more adaptable. Our village depends on it. A sudden rustling in the trees made them both turn. Kenta emerged, his face pale, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. They're coming, he managed to say between gasps. A whole battalion. They've mobilized everything they have left. The weight of his words sank in. Takashi's grip tightened around his blade. Hiroshi's expression grew stern. Then we fight. We use every trick, every lesson, every shadow at our disposal. Hiroshi quickly gathered the students, his voice calm but commanding. Listen carefully. The aliens have underestimated us for the last time. We will use this to our advantage. We know these forests, these paths, better than they ever will. They may have numbers, but we have the land on our side. Takashi felt a spark of determination flare in his chest. He looked around at his fellow students, seeing that same resolve mirrored in their faces. The fear that had once gripped them was gone, replaced by a fierce will to protect their home. They were ready. The sound of alien footsteps and the hum of their machines grew louder, echoing through the forest. The ground trembled slightly as the battalion advanced, their formation tight, their weapons gleaming. Takashi could see their leader, a tall figure in silver armor, barking orders in a strange, guttural language. He watched as the aliens fanned out, their eyes scanning the trees, searching for any sign of movement. Hiroshi signaled, and the students melted into the shadows, their training taking over. Takashi moved silently through the underbrush, every sense on high alert. He could hear the crunch of leaves under the aliens' boots, the soft clicks of their scanning devices. His heart beat steadily, each pulse a reminder of what they were fighting for. The first trap was triggered with a snap. A section of the ground gave way, sending a group of aliens tumbling into a pit filled with sharpened stakes. Their screams were short, cut off by the swift finality of the trap. Takashi felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the others hesitate, their confidence shaken. No! Hiroshi's voice was a mere breath on the wind. Takashi and his comrades sprang into action, launching a barrage of arrows from hidden positions. The aliens, caught off guard, scrambled for cover. Takashi moved like a phantom, striking swiftly and retreating into the darkness. Kenta was beside him, his movements fluid, a deadly precision guiding his strikes. Takashi saw the calm determination in his eyes, a mirror of his own resolve. They fought side by side, their actions synchronized, a silent understanding passing between them with every step. The aliens regrouped, their leader shouting commands, urging them to press forward. Takashi could see the frustration in their movements, the fear creeping into their ranks. They were powerful, but they were not invincible. They bled, they faltered, and Takashi intended to make them remember it. Suddenly, a bright flash erupted from the alien ranks, a blinding light that seared through the trees. Takashi shielded his eyes, feeling the heat on his skin. He heard Hiroshi's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back! Regroup!" The students retreated deeper into the forest, using the trees and the undergrowth to shield themselves from the searing light. Takashi's heart pounded as he ran, the adrenaline surging through his veins. He could hear the aliens behind them, their shouts growing louder, more frantic. They reached a small clearing, and Hiroshi quickly reorganized them, his eyes scanning the forest for any sign of pursuit. "We can't let them push us back any further," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to lure them into the heart of the forest. There are traps there that even they can't escape." Takashi nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. "We'll draw them in," he said. "But we need to be careful. They're getting desperate. That makes them more dangerous." Hiroshi placed a hand on Takashi's shoulder, his grip firm. "Desperation can be a powerful weapon, but it can also be their downfall. Remember what you've learned. Trust in your instincts." The sound of the alien's approach grew nearer, the forest seeming to hold its breath. Takashi took his position, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. But he also felt a strange sense of calm, a clarity that cut through the noise and the fear. The first alien appeared, then another, their movements cautious, their weapons raised. Takashi waited, his breath steady, his body poised. He could see the determination in their eyes, but he could also see the uncertainty. They were walking into a trap, and deep down they knew it. With a swift motion, Takashi threw a smoke bomb, filling the clearing with a thick, choking fog. He heard the alien shouts of confusion, their footsteps stumbling as they tried to navigate the blinding haze. Takashi moved quickly, striking out from the shadows, his blade finding its mark. Beside him, Kenta fought with a quiet intensity, his strikes precise and lethal. Together, they wove through the smoke, a deadly dance of shadow and steel. The aliens were formidable, but they were out of their element, their confidence eroded by the relentless assault. As the smoke began to clear, Takashi saw the alien leader standing in the center of the clearing, his armor scorched, his weapon raised. There was a look of defiance in his eyes, a refusal to back down. Takashi felt a surge of respect for his opponent, but he knew there could be no mercy here. With a final, swift strike, Takashi brought his blade down, the alien leader's weapon falling from his grasp. The forest fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of the students, and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Hiroshi stepped forward, his expression grave. "This is our home," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the stillness. "And we will protect it with everything we have." Takashi nodded, feeling the weight of their victory settle over him. They had fought bravely, but the battle was far from over. The aliens would return, stronger and more determined than before. But Takashi knew that they were ready. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their spirits unbroken. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, Takashi stood with his comrades, a quiet resolve burning in his chest. The war was not yet won, but they had shown the aliens that they were not to be underestimated.